I'm Karin. Thanks, Mike. I'm Karin Schutjer, co-editor with Hester of German Quarterly. We'd like to welcome you all. It's so great to see so many people from so many different institutions. So we'd like to begin by thanking and acknowledging our friends at the AATG, our sponsoring organization. The executive director, Mike Shaughnessy, is here doing tech for us. And also we want to acknowledge Evan Worthing, outreach and engagement coordinator, who did a lot of the logistics for us. So as you just heard, the session is being recorded and we will post it to our website later on. So this is the fourth in a series of outreach roundtables that the GQ editorial team has done in the last 2 years. The other events have considered what makes for an effective book review, scholarly articles, peer reviews, and I am about to place in the chat links to those, to recordings of those events. We also want to promote an upcoming roundtable on academic book publishing in German studies, organized by our wonderful book review editors, Nisha Chronister and Elliot Schreiber. So that will be in February, and you'll find all the information about that also in the chat. So we just wanted to say a few words about the genesis and rationale behind this event. The idea occurred to us because we observed that we had content in our recent summer issue that could contribute to a broader conversation about the challenges we're facing as a field. That issue includes a review essay on the crisis in the humanities by Astrida Tantillo and a forum concerning linguistic indifference, co-edited by Chantelle Warner and David Gramling, and Chantelle is here with us tonight. Our thoughts also turn to our sister journal, Unterrichtspraxis, edited by Karin Baumgartner and Matt Schulze, and their recent special issue on rediscoveries in a time of disruption. And Karin is here representing the journal. Finally, we recruited John Lyon as someone with experience with German programs that successfully recruit and serve STEM and professional students. So we intentionally sought out people representing different points of view. I think it's fair to say that nobody is offering a panacea, nor claiming that a single emphasis should rule out others. Obviously, each of our programs presents distinct needs and opportunities. A further note, all of our panelists tonight are senior scholars with significant administrative or editorial experience, and to some extent, they see the field through those lenses. So we're also contemplating a follow-up roundtable sometime next year, showcasing a different set of voices. Finally, we also acknowledge that there are so many other forums in which these conversations are taking place, and that multiplicity is exactly what we need right now. So I think Hester will continue.
Which is horrible, but you do what you gotta do.
There we go. Okay, and if everyone could just mute yourself, that would be great if you're not currently speaking. So we've posted a brief bibliography in the chat, and we like to encourage everyone to share resources or publications that we could add to the bibliography. The chat is open throughout. And the presentation portion of the roundtable will last for about 40 minutes, followed by a Q&A. And we're going to ask everyone to please post your questions in the chat, and we'll gather questions and then post them to the panelists. We'll begin with a first round in which we'll ask each panelist to briefly outline the standpoint or angle from which they approach the state of German studies, and kind of talk just a bit about their specific concerns and their overall contributions. And this will be followed by a second round in which we ask them to highlight one particular intervention. So in our first round, we're going to ask each panelist to speak for about 3 to 5 minutes. And I'm going to turn it back to Karin, and she'll introduce each panelist before they begin talking.
Okay, so John Lyon is first. John Lyon recently became the chair of the School of Modern Languages at Georgia Tech, and before that, he worked at the University of Pittsburgh, where he was a longtime chair of German. He publishes on 18th and 19th century literature and is the author of 2 books. He's also edited a number of volumes and special journal issues. He is currently the editor-in-chief of the book series New Studies in the Age of Goethe at Bucknell University Press. John.
Thank you, Karin. Thanks to both Karin and Hester for organizing this. I really appreciate that, for the German Quarterly for arranging that. And thank you to the AATG and Mike Shaughnessy for the great work they do in supporting our profession and sponsoring events like this one, and financial support and other benefited so greatly from them. So grateful for what they're doing. Thanks to my fellow panelists for some of the engaging discussions we've already had before this evening, and I look forward to continuing those tonight. And thank you all for attending. I hope you will contribute a lot this evening. I'm looking forward to learning from you. As Karin and Hester said, my name is John Lyon. I'm currently the chair of the School of Modern Languages at Georgia Tech. I've been here about 4 months. Before that, I was at the University of Pittsburgh for 23 years, 11 of those as department chair. My specific focus tonight is a concern that I think everybody on this call would be familiar with, but as in my administrative position, it's particularly a focus of mine. It's a bean counting focus. I'm concerned about the shrinking of our field, which is in great part due to a decline in student enrollments. Most institutional budget models, at least for those who are working at state institutions, such as my current and as well as my previous institution, are driven by enrollment. If you don't have the numbers, you don't get the dollars. And falling enrollments is a problem in our field, but it's not unique to our field. I'm sure that many of you have seen the MLA report on enrollments in non-English languages that was released earlier this month. And it notes that between 2016 and 2021, there was a 16% drop across all languages. So this is we're part of a problem that's happening to all languages, but in German, it was more acute. We had a 33.6% decline, and we also saw 172 German programs close. That number pains my heart. And those are people with jobs, those are relationships that have been built that are being lost. So what I see is that we can have the most intellectually stimulating programs, the best programs in the country, but if we can't meet minimum enrollments in our classes, deans are going to force us to cut them, or they'll cut them for us. And subsequently, they'll be cutting faculty lines, and subsequently, they may be closing down programs. If we want German to thrive, we have to have strong enrollments. And what I'm saying here is, I think, obvious, and we all know that, and it's the pain we're all facing, but I just think we need to say this clearly, that this is one of the fundamental bread and butter pieces of our profession right now. Whatever intellectual directions we may be moving in, we have to have the interest there. There are many causes for weak enrollments, but I don't think that they're as clear as they may be made out to be. I know that many people blame the removal of language requirements, and I'm not convinced of that position, that is what is driving low enrollments. I currently work at a tech institution where there is no language requirement, and the School of Modern Languages, nonetheless, has the second highest number of minors enrolled across the institute. I think only computer science beats us, but you think of all the engineering programs we have and all the other programs here at Georgia Tech, and students are choosing without having a requirement to enroll in German courses. They may not be going after the major, but they're enrolling. They want to learn the language and some of the culture. And that tells me that even without a requirement, many students are taking languages of their own volition. They find something valuable there. And so solving the enrollment problems will require understanding why students take languages and trying to speak to those motivations. And I'll phrase it this way: my concern is that enrollments are dropping because students or their parents, and I think that's a very significant factor, don't find German studies relevant. To increase enrollments, German needs to be relevant to our students, and we need to make the case for that relevance to our students. to get them even in the door. And that's the challenge. The task is to make German in our sphere of influence. Obviously, geopolitical circumstances that will make German more relevant. The fall of the Berlin Wall was a great one where we saw enrollment spike, but of late it's been a constant decline. As Karin said, there's no panacea, there's no one-size-fits-all model of relevance. For some students, relevance is understood in utilitarian terms. Will this course or degree lead to a job? For others, it's more personal or abstract. Will this course provide a meaningful break from my courses in science, business, and technology? Will it feed my sense of fulfillment and wonder? And for others, it may be more social. Can I find a community in this class or program that the larger programs I study in don't offer? So I see there are very different ways to speak to the issue of relevance. Those are just a few. There's no single solution, but there are some steps that I think we can all take to mitigate this seeming slide towards irrelevance. I'll try to discuss one or two of these a bit later when we discuss specific interventions, and I'll turn the mic back over to Karin. And
thank you so much, John. That's a wonderful way to frame the whole panel. Our next speaker is Astrida Tantillo. Astrida is professor of Germanic Studies and History at the University of Illinois at Chicago. She is a Goethe scholar and former president of the Goethe Society of North America, and the author of 3 books. She served as dean of the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences at UIC for over 10 years. Tomorrow, i.e. December 1st, will be her first day as the 10th president of the Newberry Library. Astrida.
Thank you. And I also just want to echo John's thanks to the AATG and to the organizers. And I think this is a wonderful opportunity for us to discuss the issues facing us. I want to say that I'm going to start more broadly from the perspective of the humanities, and then a little bit later in my remarks talk more specifically about German. But I want to say, as a humanist and as a Germanist who was dean, I really tried to do all that I could to protect the humanities and our foreign language requirement, which we had still have for 2 years. And I have to say, I kind of agree with John. It's not the panacea. We have a 2-year foreign language requirement, yet our German majors are really still dropping. So one thing that I was often surprised at within the context of our fellow humanists, missed opportunities, as when departments would not try to ask for positions where there was real student demand, or when department heads would schedule more upper level or graduate courses than they really needed or appeared to need, and didn't place the dynamic professors in the lower level or beginning classes where they might be able to attract students, or to the extent to which departments would blame forces external to themselves for the decline in enrollments. And I'm not discounting any of them, and all of them have certain kinds of weight, but they would say it was because advisors were telling students not to major or double major in German, or that it was because of the forced grid class scheduling that German would suffer because people wouldn't, or the humanities would suffer because people wouldn't want to take early morning classes or late evening classes, or that the pandemic effect, or politicians discounting certain majors or programs. Again, I'm not discounting any of that, but I think what I tried to emphasize in my review piece is that we don't really have control over a lot of those factors. What we do have control over is what happens in our classes and how we approach that. And I've been kind of struck by a lot of things that have been written, how little time we spend analyzing where we might have, what we might be able to do, where what we have done might be to blame for some of our declining enrollment. And one way to perhaps begin that discussion or re-begin looking at some of the ways in which we might change our practices is to look where the humanities are flourishing. And outside of academe, they seem to be doing a great deal better than within academe. And you could look at video games based on novels, or streaming series that are extremely popular, or series that are based on fact, where people want to look at the histories to see what's true and what's not true, blockbuster exhibitions, Broadway musicals, et cetera. There are all kinds of areas in which the humanities are doing alive and well, and public intellectuals, whether or more popular magazines or newspapers all kind of emphasize how important the humanities are. And so what I was wondering is, to what extent we have gone too far away from material or textual cultural engagement with the text? To what extent have we de-emphasized the kind of pleasure in the humanities that I think John was speaking about, that many STEM students are taking humanities courses in order to find that pleasure? And so what would happen if we would think less about instrumentalizing the humanities or emphasizing their applicability, or trying to say that they really do bring some kind of social change, all of which may be true, but if you're a student and you want to study something that is perhaps peripheral to German, but directly related to sociology or anthropology or psychology, aren't you more likely to take those courses? So what would happen if we started thinking about focusing on those areas in which we really are good at and which we've really been trained at, or we could have that enthusiasm, and always kind of looking at the ways in which students might get enjoyment out of it, as well as being able to capitalize on our engagement. So I would say, I'll talk about specific engagements also a little bit later, but I would just conclude by saying we might want to just think generally about ways in which we can contribute to the humanities and to general education, and to have a real kind of force in reformatting that. A lot of universities are looking at right now how to redo gen ed, and that might be a way for us to find a way in. And I think I'll stop with that.
Thank you so much, Astrida. Our next panelist is Chantelle Warner. Chantelle is professor of German Studies and Second Language Acquisition and Teaching at the University of Arizona, where she is also currently acting associate dean for the College of Humanities. From 2014 until this year, she served as a language program director for German. She co-directs and is co-PI for the Center for Educational Resources and Culture, Language, and Literacy, which is a national language resource center supported by the U.S. Department of Education's Title VI program. Okay, Chantelle.
Thank you so much. It bears repeating, so I'm also going to thank Karin and Hester, and also AATG for supporting this panel, as well as my co-panelist. It's an honor, but it is a daunting one to represent German studies today, as well as the charting our way into the future. And I think in some ways, we're kind of the edge pieces that help you to zoom out and see the big picture. And so I'm looking forward to the discussion as well, so that we can kind of continue to put that together. My little puzzle piece here is going to kind of come, I think, a little bit from a different perspective, but we're going to see some overlap with the others. It was framed as linguistic indifference, inspired by both the GSA symposium that David Gramling and I co-organized, as well as the forum that we co-edited in German Studies Quarterly, and then also as German studies as a multilingual field. And I think these are kind of two contrasting sides of the same coin in some ways. On the one hand, linguistic indifference, as we thought about it in those two endeavors, was the ways in which sometimes German studies, even though it feels like language is at the heart of it, can actually manifest as a really alingual sort of field, or a field that's not particularly attentive to what does it mean to be a field that deals with language. And then on the other hand, this idea of multilingualism, recognizing that German studies is a field that is linguistically rich and complex, but also that languages complicate things, and that sometimes feels like it's working against us, but it's also part of the good work that we do. And so, as Karin referenced, my understandings of this have been shaped by many peers and students, but in particular, this group of scholars who I worked with on the GSA symposium, as well as the forum that we did. I just want to mention the others' names really quickly, in addition to David Gramling and myself: Ted Dawson, Hannah Elridge, Hiram Maxim, Sharon Munger-Wales, Patrick Lashinsky, Karolina Rieger, Julia Rook, Mariana Rashina Pankova, and Janice McGregor. And I wanted to mention the names in part to give due credit, but also because it's quite a multidisciplinary group of people. And I think that was one of the things that was really interesting about thinking about linguistic indifference and multilingualism with that group of people. Basically, anything that you like that I say, you can kind of credit back to that group. And if you don't like it, then that's all me. So the way I decided to approach this is kind of around four almost maxims that relate to these questions of linguistic indifference and multilingualism. And so the first is thinking about the German language not as a skill set that is for the real German studies. And I think that has two corollaries. So one is that we aren't just thinking about the first and the second year as something you kind of get through to get to the good stuff, but thinking about even in the beginning levels of language study, that this is an intellectually rich space and we should treat it as such, and that that's really important to giving students an experience that's going to want them to continue. But on the other side, it's also thinking about the subsequent years of study as also being infused with linguistic inquiry into explorations that will help students to think about what does it matter that we're speaking or reading or engaging in German. The second one is that German language is particular, but it doesn't exist in some sort of linguistic Sonderweg. It's not in its kind of own isolated space, that German exists and is in contact with and enters into ecosystems with other languages, and that we need to be able to reflect in our classrooms and in our research on how it does this and what effects and how this is really valuable to our field. And that to me is really close to home because I work at an institution that is a Hispanic serving institution, as well as an aspiring Native serving institution. So there is always an element of why not Spanish or why not indigenous languages? And I don't think that has to be a problem necessarily, but it's something to reflect on. I think also another aspect of that is looking at German as it participates in other transnational discourses. One of the examples that came to mind was thinking about the discussions around Black Lives Matter and the George Floyd killing, and thinking about how those discussions carried across the globe, but they weren't the same discussions identically, and that's a space that we can use also for reflection. The third maxim is the question of what language we are even teaching or researching when we say we are teaching and researching German. And to understand that, I draw a lot from frameworks from fields in second language studies and in applied linguistics, such as multiliteracies and translanguaging. And these are all paradigms that push our understandings of language as a sort of singular or unitary kind of object. So with that is thinking about the linguistic diversity that is German and that is part of German studies. And then also thinking about our own classrooms and our own spaces and communities as part of that, that they're not always kind of replicas of some kind of ideal imagined German-speaking world, but that they are German-speaking communities in and of themselves. And one of the examples that I think is maybe too important to highlight there from things we've done in our program is thinking about the place of non-binary pronouns, whereas sometimes there comes a authenticity question. Is this used widely enough in the German-speaking world? And maybe that's not quite the right question because our group of students, those communities are also legitimate communities of German speakers. And then the fourth and final maxim is the one that I think connects the most to what the other panelists have talked about a little bit. Many of you are familiar with the saying, the opposite of love isn't hate, it's indifference. And so I think the opposite of linguistic indifference is something a little bit more like love, or at least affect, and something that gets at these non-instrumental aspects of what drives a lot of language learning and language study. And John already mentioned the MLA report, but one of the other pieces of information from the last two MLA reports is that the language that's grown the most is, of course, Korean. And if you look at why students are studying Korean, it's not instrumental or market-driven at all. It is very much about something more about passion or love or identity, or a desire to create some kind of space of linguistic hospitality for something that's new and different. And so thinking about, even as we think about the marketability and career readiness of our majors, also embracing that aspect and welcoming this difference and this vulnerability that comes with learning a new language, as it does with new social and epistemological positions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chantelle. Our fourth panelist is Karin Baumgartner. Karin is professor of German at the University of Utah and a co-editor of the journal Unterrichtspraxis / Teaching German. Her current research focuses on travel literature in the early 19th century. She's published extensively on early 19th century women authors such as Helmina Fanchesi, Carolina Pickler, and Carolina de la Motte Fouquet, and their theories of the public sphere. Thank you, or please.
Thank you, Karin. I also would love to thank ATG for hosting the panel, and of course to my two colleagues, Karin and Hester, for organizing it and inviting me to represent Unterrichtspraxis here. I'm actually going to echo a lot of what Chantelle has just said. But before I do that, I want to go back to the MLA report that John mentioned, except I'm going to go back to the MLA report from 2007. Remember that one from the report that said that our programs are divided into lower level language teaching and upper level literature teaching, with lecturers teaching at the lower level and tenure track people at the upper level. And what I see, and I have taken over, my colleague Matt Schultz and I, we have now done 2 issues we have taken over a year ago. But what we are seeing is this divide reified in the articles that are submitted to us. We have very few authors from Research One universities who publish on German language learning. And German language learning here, I want to make sure that it's understood as not just teaching the lower 4 semesters, but really developing language all the way up to a major and even in graduate studies. So I've done a little search, and there are no recent articles on teaching German in a German language in a graduate program. So, for example, that's completely neglected, that we are developing our graduate students German. That's just assumed that they are doing on their own. So the most authors that we are having are teaching either at the college level, at R2s, or they are, if they are at Research One universities, they are the coordinator, the language coordinator, or the linguist who will publish with us. Scholars on the tenure track are doing what I'm going to call real research, and then they are publishing in German Quarterly. So even our system, the division between the 2 journals reifies this division between language and what I'm going to call Germanistic, a version of the German Germanistic here. However, now that, what did John say, 172 programs were closed, that means that there are a whole lot fewer of us. They are very, and we can really tell that there are fewer authors who are submitting to us, and there are fewer readers, reviewers who are willing to read an article. And for us, so for me, it's really alarming, because it tells me that the scope of our field, teaching German, is shrinking. Fewer people writing, fewer people reviewing. We get a lot of pressure from our publisher, our beloved Wiley, to branch out and to focus on China, but also Latin America and Africa, which we are totally willing to do. However, the question then arises, are we still a society journal that addresses concerns that our teachers have? What does it mean when I need to solicit manuscripts from China? We get some from China or from Eastern Europe, and a lot of those articles are what I call show and tell. They tell us how they teach German. However, many of the theoretical issues that we are going through, where we are dealing with multiliteracies, for example, Chantelle mentioned, are not addressed. And I am left with the question whether to publish so that I can fill my journal. And so I'm really invested in preaching to the choir, or preaching to people at in graduate programs, that what we are doing is not just Germanistic, the way we would do it in Germany, but we are really teaching the language and the culture to non-German speakers, to non-native speakers. And I'm also going to talk about my interventions a little bit later. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Karin. So I think our plan now is to have a kind of lightning round where each panelist talks about an intervention that they deem to be effective and that could serve as a model or inspiration for other programs. And so we'll try to keep that to about 3 minutes per person. John, would you like to start?
Sure, I'll try and keep it to 3 minutes, and I'm starting with one intervention. If I have time, I'll squeeze in 1 or 2 more. So I'm at a tech institution, so I'm going to focus on the more pragmatic utilitarian types of relevance, not the type of relevance that Astrida was talking about, although I'm very interested in those, and those speak to me perhaps more. But to do this I'm doing so with a caveat that this is not the only kind of relevance. This is just one kind of relevance that speaks to one subset of students. We all know that study abroad helps enthuse students about participation in German, about continuing German when they get back from it. And one thing that has been done at Georgia Tech, and this precedes me, I'm not taking credit for this, this is the work of my colleagues, is to leverage a study abroad to focus on these very specific outcomes in relation to practical and business-related skills. So most of our study abroad programs here at Georgia Tech are called Language for Business and Technology, LBATs. And it's a different version of study abroad where, of course, you go over. My colleague Britta Kalin this past summer took a group over to Munich, and they went to some of the traditional sites you would go to when you go to Munich and take a study abroad group there. But then the students who go there, they also have to prepare a Lebenslauf, a resume, they have to prepare a business plan, and they have to research the companies that they're going to visit before they go there. And then what happens is that she has coordinated with the Georgia Office of International Development that has partnerships there in Munich and has its own office there in Munich. And so what happens is our students were going to meet executives and designers at Airbus and also at Audi in Ingolstadt, and that they met with an autonomous driving software engineer at Apex AI, a smaller autonomous driving company. They toured BMW. They met with an alum currently working at Google in Munich, and they discussed career pathways. They also met with the Georgia Office of International Development office in Munich, which told them about the internships it's set up where students can study at the LMU in Munich for a semester or a year and follow that up with an internship at the Georgia Office for International Development in Munich so they can be using their skills. And so in addition, they also met with leaders of nonprofits focused on some of the UN sustainability goals. For example, the leader of BISS, which is Bürger in sozialen Schwierigkeiten, citizens who experience social difficulties, who publish their own magazine and train people who've experienced homelessness so they can become fully employed and independent. They also visited the Rachel Carson Center for Environment and Society, where they learned about environmental history of Munich and the Isar. So they were very much engaged, not with just what I will crassly label sightseeing study abroad, and I know none of us really do that. We're always teaching, but it's with a kind of study abroad that's focused on business, technology, and a very pragmatic kind of outcomes. So that would be one intervention. I'll mention 2 others real quick without the detail. If you're in an urban area, you probably have a German-American Chamber of Commerce there. Please reach out to them, work with them. When I was at Pitt, we had a great relationship with them. We had students interning there. We had connections to local companies, big companies like Bosch and others that were working in Pittsburgh. We could bring them in for career events. That was another thing. And finally, I'd point to an intervention that is doing something, you may be familiar with it, how German is involved in multiple cross-disciplinary career-focused programs, typically 5 years long. They've got an international business program, an international computer science, international engineering, international pharmaceutical sciences, international studies and diplomacy, where you learn German, but you're also linking that to a business related, technology related, science related skill. So those are just 3 quick interventions to get a very pragmatic focus to bring relevance in that regard. Thanks.
Thanks so much, John. Those are extraordinary examples. Astrida?
Just give a couple of quick ones as well. So one thing that was very successful for the humanities in general, for recruitment events for students and their parents, we prepared for every major a list of professions that a student can do. And so it really helped parents and their families feel a lot better about their students majoring in something that didn't seem practical if they knew that there was, 30 different professions that this major could prepare the students for. The other thing I think was very helpful, deans and provosts and chancellors really care about rankings of universities, and they want to support graduate students in any way that they can. And with declining number of enrollments in basic language programs, one of the things that we did was in our required first year seminar, which is just a 1 credit hour, basically an introduction to university studies, we opened that up for graduate students. And a lot of German graduate students teach that. They also then get a lot of extra good experience, and it helps their CVs. And similarly, we had a pilot program for first year composition or first year writing program where philosophy graduate students were trained, and then rather than hiring outside lecturers when the English department didn't have enough graduate students, philosophy students did that. And we also very successfully did that with 1 German graduate student several years ago. And I know that's something we're exploring to do now with other language programs and with the German program. And I'll just stop with that.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a good reminder that we can't leave the parents out of the calculation. Chantelle?
I also struggled to choose just one, but I've tried, and in part because I think if in the forum, a lot of my colleagues and co-authors in there also provide a lot of interventions, so that's a plug. But the one that I wanted to focus on is kind of a cluster of art and play-based activities that we've had over the years in our program. So I think in some ways this is a nice parallel but contrast to what John talked about. So one of these was an event called Fish Out of Water, which we hosted for a series of years that was originally launched together with David Gramling. And this was described as a celebration of second languages. And so it was basically an invitation to perform songs or poems or other texts in a language that wasn't your first language or a language you were necessarily comfortable within. And so students would go and choose everything from poems from Goethe to they would translate their favorite pop song that was on the radio now into a second language. And although German was the host for this, it wasn't exclusively for German students. It was for students learning languages across campus. Another one that we've done quite recently was a multilingual poetry club that was co-organized between Italian studies and German studies. And a colleague of mine, Borbala Gasper, did that together with me, where we had kind of a drop-in maker space where we had a number of invitations for students to engage with poetry, writing it, responding to it. The most popular activity was creating kind of collage poems out of old magazines and old newspapers. And students would come into the space, engage sometimes with one another, sometimes with just their text, but have a space where they could, many of them reported just feeling like the weight of the day dripped off of them as they sat there and engaged with language and with play. And then we've had for the last few years German game night in the department, which I know is something other programs have as well. But that's created also this space that's based in play and community. And I think all of these kind of create kind of a community space, an alternate space for students to explore German. But I think it's also notable that 2 of these weren't German exclusive. And I think a lot of what we are up against in some ways with the enrollment drops in languages is this linguistic indifference that students receive messaging across the board continually that English is enough. And so by creating these multilingual kind of safe spaces, it was a way of also affirming multilingual lives in a sense, and that's helped to construct this space where it's not just German, but where German is one of a number of languages that are kind of coming together that aren't just exclusively English.
Fantastic. Karin?
Yeah, so what we wanted to do is to lower the barrier of entry for writing an article. And what we did is we revised our article categories and have now a traditional research article, a shorter praxis article, and then the forum articles, which are very short. They're only 2,000 words. And we started out our first issue with a forum on disruption, just because we wanted to see what people are thinking and what's out there in the field. And that was very, very successful. We received 45 proposals and then about, I think, 26 finished papers. And we were so successful that we now we could bracket out the DEIA articles in their own section and frame them with a larger article that lays out the field. And we have decided to continue doing these fora. We are doing another one on recruitment and probably another one on teacher education. And we are also partnering with other constituencies. So for example, with WIG or with DDGC, to ask them to bring us topics or to guest edit a thematic issue on a topic, so that we are not just reaching out to our own network, but we have partners and their networks. And we are trying to bring in other constituency, and they are high school teachers on the one hand, and of course the professors at the R1 institutions into the fold.
Thank you, Karin. As you said, knowledge transfer is absolutely crucial for our field to continue. So Hester is going to handle Q&A.
Thank you all so much for these excellent presentations. And I encourage everyone to post questions or provocations into the chat. We have not received a question yet, so surprisingly. I'll just give people a little bit of time, but if any of you wants to chime in with some of the other interventions that you were thinking about and thought you might not have time to speak to, I think that would be great, because we have a little bit of extra time. So I don't know, does anyone have something burning that they would like to pose? Otherwise, the questions are starting to come in, so I'm happy to start posing those if not.
I mean, I would just like to amplify what Astrida said and also what Chantelle says. I think we have really forgotten the pleasure of learning a language, and of how exciting it can be, and also how playful it is. And I do think we have to go back to that aspect of the language, or of language learning, rather, than making it the same as, I don't know, engineering education, making it something where the students do get a break from the calculus class, for example.
Yes, thank you for that. So, yeah, go ahead, John.
I was just I see there's a question in the chat. Maybe you were gonna read that, or
yeah,
it was from Jen William.
Yeah,
who's asking about the large drop in German enrollments is related to a drop in high school enrollments, and mentioning programs such as the AATG, Goethe Institute Spark program. What other concrete measures can we take? I mean, I think that's a great question. Coming here to Georgia Tech has been very instructive for me. There's an institute here in Atlanta called the Halle Foundation, which has been very generous in supporting German, both at the K through 12 and the higher education level in Georgia in general. And a number of weeks ago, we had a meeting on a Saturday with all the Atlanta area Georgia instructors, German instructors, and it was both K through 12 and predominantly middle school through high school and college instructors. And it was fascinating for me because I hadn't really been doing that in my past institution. And there was engagement, and they were making presentations on their effective learning programs. And I learned some stuff about teaching from them. And we were sharing our information as well. And it was just, there was a sense that we were building bridges in a way that I hadn't been doing before. So I was very grateful for that opportunity. And I would just encourage us, whatever opportunities we get, to support our local high school, middle school teachers in German. Please take that up. I know the AATG does a German day here in Georgia that's very popular, and that strengthens that excitement, enthusiasm about it.
Does anyone else on the panel want to speak to this question of cultivating pipelines, especially in the K through 12 area, Chantelle?
I'm not going to speak to it, but but it's still a response to the question, because I think a lot of it is a real concern. And as was mentioned, one of my jobs is as a language center director. And one of our things that we do is a lot of outreach and working with high school teachers in Arizona, but very few of them are in German. And the ones who are rarely come to our events. And that's not a critique. It's because they do so many things beyond just their teacher role to keep their programs growing and create community that they simply don't have the time. So I think in addition to still trying to strengthen those ties to high school, we have to, I think, accept that a lot of our majors are going to come in and start in the first semester, and think about what implications that has for how we design our programs. Because we're just not going to be able to assume that we have a lot of students who are testing into that third or second year even. And so thinking about building the major up from the bottom rather than thinking about the first or the second year as kind of pre-major sorts of classes, I think is one of the ways to address that.
Astrida? Okay, sorry.
Maybe I can jump in for Astrida to solve her tech problem. Yeah, we at the Unterrichtspraxis, we are trying to create a space for all instructors of German. So really going from middle school, Saturday schools, all the way through to graduate programs. And I have started to send out papers for review across the line. So I have sent out a couple of papers to people at our ones who are not traditionally publishing with us, and I'm waiting for the response, and I'll follow up with an email. And I have sent out some of the forum pieces to high school teachers. And I'm trying to create this community and also sort of the self-confidence among the reviewers that a high school teacher can review something that was written by a college faculty. And on the other hand, also that somebody who is a Research One university is still teaching German in some ways. And these people can review our papers too. And so I'm trying to create that community, because I think we really have to get the sense that we are all in this together. I mean, we are all sinking together if we don't, get a handle on this, on the pipeline. So we are going to do maybe a forum, maybe even an issue on teacher education. And I just would like to get a sense also what the German teacher education in this country looks like. It's very particularized. And so we are working on that.
Thank you. And I just want to highlight what a couple of people have pointed out in the chat. The Seal of Biliteracy, which is a fairly new initiative in secondary schools, is something to explore here. Also, focusing on recruiting students who have done the German AP exam and gotten high scores, or have done the IB program and have gotten high scores there, kind of focusing recruitment efforts on some of those populations. I want to kind of shift the conversation to a couple of the other points that have been raised in the chat. I'm going to start with Brigitte Rosbacher's question. It seems to be a matter of balance between the pragmatic and the playful. And I think this was really coming out in a lot lot of the contributions that we heard. So can you maybe address a little bit more how this balance works specifically at your individual institutions? Is there anyone who wants to jump in and respond there, Chantelle?
I do. I mean, I think that's exactly right. I think it's not an either or. It really does have to be both. One thing, maybe this is a research study for somebody to do and then submit to Unterrichtspraxis, but we for years now have been offering a survey to the students in our first 3 years of instruction, and we ask them questions about their motivation for studying German and, you know, a variety of different kinds of background questions. And one of the things I found fascinating is that it's usually affective reasons at the beginning. It's comfortable classes, it's love of German, it sounded interesting, but there seems to be somewhere around the end of the second year or the third year, you start getting more people who are thinking about studying in Germany or working in Germany. And so I think there's kind of, I'd love for somebody, maybe it'll be me, but this is an invitation for somebody to do a study that looks at how those trajectories change over the course of a study, because I think often students come in for those more playful or more effective reasons or personal reasons, and then they find reasons that are pragmatic or instrumental, but we don't always see that shift along the way or what it looks like. And I think that's something that we probably could work with more if we knew exactly what it looked like in our programs.
Anyone else like to jump in? There's also some excellent ideas that are being discussed in the chat, and floated some ways of addressing you know, the passion of many students for studying language and the reluctance of their parents to pay for that study. Is that a topic that anyone would like to speak to on the panel specifically? This kind of question of how we you know, can continue to address getting this message about the relevance and importance of humanities study and German language study and language study, broadly speaking, to not only students, but also their parents early and often, as Condre wrote in the chat. John?
I don't know that I have an answer for that. I mean, there was a question in the chat about people using AI in class. You know, how do we change that? But that for me raises a bigger question. I think that's one of the reasons people feel that German might not, that learning any foreign language might not be relevant right now, because you've got Google Translate or other translation programs that are just getting better and better every day. And why would you need to learn a second language? It's not worth it, is what I think some people think. And we have the duty as language instructors to be speaking against that and to say, no, here's why we still need a language, why it does something that AI won't do for us. We can talk about the cognitive reasons, we can talk about intercultural understanding and all those other things, but we need to be making that case because nobody else is going to be doing it for us. And I say that with a bit of reluctance, because the questions about how do we balance play and pragmatism, we need to be doing both of those too. There's a lot we need to be doing. And I think a lot of colleagues I've talked to, a lot of programs are exhausted because they're trying to do all of these things at once. And it is exhausting. Exactly. And I don't know, I don't have a good answer for that other than we need to be doing these things for our survival. And so, yeah, I think we need to take a role as public intellectuals in speaking out about the importance of language learning, whether it be our language or another language. That will, you know, kind of rising tide theory, lift all of us. But yeah.
I just wanted to pick up a little bit on what John's saying. I think in some ways, maybe working with other foreign languages, which I think has been mentioned also in this panel, it relieves some of the burden, but also broadens the appeal. And so maybe in thinking about how we can contribute to, say, general education, we think about it in terms of perhaps broader topics, not just German ones, European literature or culture or film or folktales. And then that way we can get the excitement and the passion that we have for German, but might be able to attract more students and then also work with other colleagues. And so again, German is suffering perhaps more than others, but other foreign languages are in the same kind of pickle. And so working with others, we might be able to develop more strength. The other thing I just wanted to mention, we should keep track of what's going on legislatively. Recently, there was some legislature wanted to introduce in the state of Illinois in high school substituting career training for foreign languages. And that's kind of like an interesting way of thinking about what foreign language is supposed to do, and very different kinds of tracks, I would think. But anyway, just something to keep in mind, that we need to keep aware of what's going on in our state legislators' minds as well.
I think I would add to that we need to keep an eye on what's going on in our own colleges. So in my own college, the English program now has a BS and has replaced the language requirement with, I think, six or 12 semesters of computer programming. And this is a track for students who want to write for video games. And for them, it's a great tool to attract students. For us, these are students who are not going to take a language, right? I wanted to add one thing about collaborating with other languages. So what we have done here in my department is I have partnered with somebody in Spanish, and we co-taught a course on immigration, and I taught about German immigration in the 19th century, and my colleague taught about Latin American immigration in the 20th century. And what it did is that we had a large class because we had a lot of Spanish students. I had fewer German students, but it balanced out because we split the grading. The students, we designed a project that both of us could have graded. So it wasn't language specific. The students then did their final project in English. We have options of adding what's called communication across the curriculum. So where we can add a 1-credit course to a course that's taught in English. I bet a lot of other programs have that too.
And that connects maybe to the question that Elliot Schreiber posed in the chat. What do panelists think about the strategy that some programs have used to increase enrollments, teaching more courses in English about German culture? The fear is that this can promote linguistic indifference, but it can also be a productive way to promote German studies. So just wondering if anyone, Chantelle, would like to speak to that.
Yeah, I mean, I do think watching that balance is important, but I also think teaching courses in English or teaching literature and translation, text and translation, doesn't have to always be done in a linguistically indifferent way. It can be even so small things such as highlighting that we're working with a translation in this class. What does it mean to read a translation? Highlighting the name of the translator as well as the name of the author and things like that, just to highlight that so that it doesn't become something that is transparent, so that students have the impression that it matters. So I think we can do both and teach courses in English in ways that are still attentive to multilingualism.
I think so too. I agree with Chantelle on that. I was talking to a colleague the other night who says this is what they're doing in their department, teaching a lot more in English, in part because there are just not enough students with the language level to do the high level courses in German, right? And in my previous institution, we've worked with language trailers like Karin mentioned. That can be very helpful to, you teach a large fairy tales course, and then you have a small subsection of that meets 1 hour a week and does the Grimms in German, right? So those can be good. I see positives and negatives to the question that Elliot raised. On the one hand, I can see that as a negotiating point with the dean if we want to get into bean counting, right? I will, if you will let me run a course with 6 or 8 students at the high level, right? I'll teach a course with 100 students, right? You're going to get a net gain in enrollment. And I can teach that course with 100 students in English. I might need a TA or two, but it's going to be ultimately a net financial win for you. So that might be a negotiating tool, a way to talk to a dean about that to make it work financially. On the other hand, I also see it as a risk because if we're teaching gen ed courses in English, why can't the English department teach these courses? Why can't some other program teach them? Why does it need to be German? So there I would just say, it can be a help, but I also see a potential risk that we expose ourselves to say, well, you're not that necessary, you can be cut. So double-edged sword.
I wanted to come back to the question that Michael Powers posed in the chat, and I think we spoke a bit about part of that question, which was how can we work with other language colleagues to address the larger issues that are at play here. But I wanted to ask the other part of this question of the panelists. Do any of you have strategies for how to advocate for non-bean counting metrics for showing the strengths of our field? Dead silence. I mean, yeah, go ahead.
I mean, my dean is an economist, so I don't really have a chance to do that. I need data, I need numbers. But what I have seen can be very effective is partnerships and connections. And if you're connected to other important programs at the university, if you're connected to external partners who are in business or science and technology or something else that might look really good for the university, that can at least give you some power, some advocacy. I mean, I recall back when our German program was cut at the University of Pittsburgh, and they were cutting other graduate program, and they were cutting other programs. They didn't cut classics as much as they cut German and religious studies, because classics had the big brother of philosophy at Pittsburgh, which is a world-renowned department, and they were connected together. That connection saved them. And I also see that connections with other institutions in and outside the university can be very helpful with that. If you say, well, we have this pipeline taking our students into this particular company or this particular field or whatever, that can be seen as something that will save you. If you have a national grant, important grants, those are things that can give you more sway with the dean. So, yeah.
And I think I would add that, you know, a lot of deans perhaps aren't as bean counting as one thinks, but there's really a necessity of, you know, if the enrollments are down and budgets are down. I think one approach that is really effective is to even ask, what can my department do, or what could faculty do to assist in any measures that are going on at the university or at the college? And I'll just give one example. I know right now my university wants to have online degrees, and especially in business and in nursing, but they don't have the gen eds available in order to offer a full online degree. They would love for the foreign language departments to create online courses for gen ed programs for other degree programs. And there's not a lot of interest among the faculty in doing that. They're offering technology support and payment for the course development, but people are even reluctant to go to meetings to find out about it. And so there may be other things that are going on at your universities that your deans or your provosts or chancellors might need help with, that you could actually assist them on a program that they might be interested in doing.
I also just wanted to mention, I put the link in the chat, the Humane Metrics Initiative. That's a Mellon-funded program that's trying to develop alternative ways of evaluating research, teaching, and service in higher education. But some of the ideas that they're working on in that program, I think also can be useful prompts for us in reshaping the kind of narratives that predominate at so many institutions, the bean counting type narratives.
Hester, if I may add,
yeah.
I think it's also important that we do collaborate with the dean on new initiatives. So here at Utah, we are building a prison degree. So we are building a degree for the women's prison. So people can start their college degree there, and as they get released, they can finish it on campus. And the different departments were asked to submit some courses. And for once, our our field where we have a lot of adjuncts and lecturers was actually in our favor. That my chair said, oh, it's much easier for me to hire an adjunct in Spanish to teach Spanish language as for the language, for the, languages core, than to pull a professor out of their program. And so we were actually languages, we were the first department to submit our part of this degree for the prison program. And so I think it's important to be collaborative and to think about ways one can contribute to the college's mission.
Chantelle.
This question I had to sit with for a second because I'm the bean counter at the moment. I'm literally the one who has to cancel the classes and tell people there's not enough students, which hurts every time. But being in that situation, you can see where that pressure is coming from. So I would echo everything everyone already said, but I also wanted to highlight something a little bit like what Evelyn posted in the chat, that I think we need to find ways to communicate how we're contributing to students' whole experience as a student in a 4-year program. I know Circle, the center that I mentioned, we have a project that's going to be coming up that looks at some of that, because on our campus, and I imagine this is similar in many other places, most of our students are double majors. So they already are students in another program, and kind of anecdotally and from teacher perspectives, we hear a lot about the kinds of emotion labor that students get out of their language programs, the ways in which belonging and these topics that are a big focus in a lot of campuses are really being facilitated by the kinds of classes that we offer, not uniquely, but in a very, very strong way. So I think thinking about these students as students who maybe study German and something else, and the ways in which German is contributing to their very human experience over 4 years of growth and transformation, I think would also help us to articulate some very non-Bean County contributions that we make.
And
Thank you for
I'll
that.
just echo one thing that Karin said, and that it looks like Kristen Holinsky is pointing to as well. Know your university's mission statement, know their goals, speak to them in the language of the vision that your president or provost or dean is giving you. If you can speak to them and saying, this is how we're doing what you're doing, instead of just saying, we're going to do what we're going to do, and we're going to try and justify it to them on our terms. If they see that you're catching their vision and you're supporting their vision, they're much more open to encouraging what you're doing, and maybe even providing funding if you've got an interesting initiative that's going to align with their newly stated strategic plan, or whatever vision statement it is. So I would not take that for granted. The administrators are very serious about those kinds of statements, as much as we may see them as, oh, this is just an exercise we have to do again, another vision statement, another strategic plan, but they take those seriously. So that's another non-bean counting way to say how we can appeal to them.
Thank you. So we're coming to the last 5 minutes of our time slot. And so I wanted to just give each panelist the opportunity maybe to just briefly wrap up if there's kind of any loose threads that you would like to return to, or if there's anything that you've seen. The chat has been very generative, I think, and vibrant with a lot of different strategies and ideas as well. And I can't read them all out here, but please feel free to highlight anything that you've noticed there that you thought was especially interesting or important for you. And maybe we'll just start with Astrida, and since John just spoke, and then kind of go back around.
I'll just say that I think that we may become smaller, and we are smaller, but that doesn't necessarily spell complete doom and gloom. And I was struck recently by somebody in the Russian program who said her classes are smaller than they used to be, even the gen ed ones, but the students who are there are really excited to be there. And it's a lot more enjoyable to teach. And so that perhaps if we do start focusing more on a balance between playfulness and pragmatism, and bringing more joy back, we'll be able to have more vibrant classrooms, more excited students, and maybe that will build. So maybe we'll be smaller, but maybe smaller is not necessarily all bad.
Thanks. Chantelle?
I think I just want to legitimize, as was already done, the feelings of burnout and exhaustion that come with this, and the emotion labor, which I think is a real part of recruitment and retention and all the things that we're pushed to do. And then I hope that bringing joy back to students is also maybe sometimes a chance to bring joy back to us as well. That we too should be able to have moments where we take joy in the work that we do.
Thanks. Karin?
Well, as I was looking through the chat, there are amazing ideas, and I would like to invite everybody to send us an article. You can go from 8,000 to 2,000 words and share your idea. I really think we need to do that. There are a lot of great ideas. There are some flourishing programs out there, and we should learn from each other. Not every solution works in every context. For example, we cannot get the addresses of students who have had German in high school. Our university does not give out that information, but it works in other contexts. And so I would really invite people to send us ideas. If you have an idea for a forum, please send those also to us. We are very open to ideas, and we want to be a platform where people can share ideas, discuss ideas, and work out what can be done.
Thanks. And John, coming back around to you for our last word.
I want to conclude on one message, and because I think there's been some doom and gloom about our profession, and we see the enemy, the implicit enemy. I think there's some binary thinking here. Is the STEM fields, the business fields, and all those other fields where the students are flocking, right? And I just want to say we can build bridges. They can be partners. They can help us. There are many in those fields who recognize the importance of language. Just yesterday at Georgia Tech, the School of Aeronautical Engineering finished a proposal for a major in Russian and aeronautic engineering, because they say our students in aeronautic engineering, these are going to be the astronauts. These are going to be the people of the space agencies. They need to know Russian. And so they built a minor that consists almost completely of courses from our School of Modern Languages, but they want that for their students. I think that's an example of the kind of things we need to start thinking about. How do we partner with them instead of seeing them as we're the alternative to them? But we can work with them just as one survival strategy to think that example doesn't work exactly for German, but I think that can inspire the kinds of ways we can think so that we're not us or them, but we can collaborate in ways that might actually aid us and help us grow.
Thank you. I think, a balance between pragmatism and joy and building bridges are nice ways to end here. I would like to also just highlight again our upcoming roundtable, hot off the press, a roundtable on academic book publishing and German studies, which will take place on February 1st, organized by our wonderful book review editors, Nietzsche Chronister and Elliot Schreiber. And that the registration for that event will be coming soon. I would also just like to thank all of our speakers, again, Astrida Tantillo, Chantelle Warner, Karin Baumgartner, and John Lyon for your participation today. And thank you to everyone in the audience for the really generative comments and thoughts. And please keep your eyes out. We're, cooking up a part 2 of this roundtable that would feature, different set of provocations and interventions for German now and the future of the field. So we look forward to seeing you again at the next incarnation of this. Thank you all again very much.